Callie Luecke, and this is my husband, Danny. And we are from North Dakota. We'll tell you a little bit more about where we are from. But this is our crew. We have 3 little girls. Mila is 5, Isa is 3, and then Greta, who you've seen around, she's 10 months. And we both grew up in North Dakota. I, after college, moved down to Memphis, Tennessee, where I worked and did an internship at Christ Community for a year, and then ended up doing PA school down there. And then after I finished up PA school, well, actually during that time in Memphis is when I got introduced to CCHF and kind of began to see what it looked like to do healthcare. I'm like, with Jesus, I guess I forgot to say I am a PA. And then after my time in Memphis finished up, I moved to Chicago and I worked at Lawndale for 2 years. And then after that, moved back to North Dakota where we've been married for the last 7 years.
I'll say Halitu, Chimachukma, Sahachifayat, Danny Luti. So that's in the Choctaw language where I'm enrolled. I also always like, as part of a formal introduction, I'm enrolled Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, but also I'm a white guy. And so I kind of have a mixed heritage in that regard. The land that we come from, I'll say Buju Indawe Madrinadot, Danny Luti Indigenous Cause. So that's the Ojibwe language, and just said, hello, my relatives. My name is Danny. So we live next to the Turtle Mountain Band Chippewa Reservation. And it's really common to introduce yourself in the native language. So both personally, it's Choctaw, but then also the land that you're coming from. The land that we're on now, at least according to the University of Cincinnati website, I don't know much about that, but as the Delaware, Miami, and Shawnee tribes, and just honor their thousands of years of stewardship of this place and the river. And my understanding is those are Algonquin language family. So a similar language family is Ojibwe.
My time in Memphis is actually when I met Steve, and I just wanted to take a moment and honor Steve as well. So Steve and Victoria, they became like spiritual mentors to me in my time in Memphis. And when I was there, I had a pact with him that whenever I got married, that he would preside over our covenant. And he did that. So we got to be, I think it was his 100th wedding and his last wedding that he did. And it was just really special to have that, and just felt really honored. I wanted to just honor him and just the impact he has had in our life and in our marriage. So there's a few pictures from our wedding.
And I also, along with introducing ourselves, I want to do a little bit of introduction from y'all. Not that you're going to each introduce yourself, but just a feel for the room a little bit. First, raising your hand if you work with Indigenous Native American patients on like a weekly basis. Is anyone? Okay, awesome. Put those few people on the spot and just ask a little bit, sharing that context of where you're at, what community. So if you rose your hand, you didn't know that I was going to ask you to say something. But to everyone, I'll give you a little more time to think about it. Hopefully this will be a very interactive session. So I'm going to ask throughout the talk, there'll be lots of participation. So for anyway, those who are working with in Indigenous communities or with Indigenous patients, would you be able to say just a little bit about your context, where you're at in the United States, or it doesn't have to be in the United States? Yeah.
I'm from Pierre, South Dakota.
Awesome.
I go to school now in Vermillion, South Dakota.
Yes.
So I'm in my first year, so I'm not seeing patients right now, but I did work for a year in the Pierre clinic.
Yeah.
We have a lot of surrounding tribes and tribal lands. And our Indian health clinic is in Pierre.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to kind of experience like health to Native Americans and Indigenous people. I think the biggest thing I realized there was just how far they would travel to come to a bigger clinic, and how that was like stood away a lot.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have care on their lands.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm close with them. And if they did, like they preferred to come to a bigger clinic with more providers, so that they can choose who was been like their care. Because of your a little bit nice.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you. And then for those of you, everyone else, if anyone's interested in just sharing what brought them to this talk today, I'd love to hear from 1 or 2 people what brought you to this particular talk. Yeah.
I don't work with different population, but I think cultural competency is very important in healthcare. So I was interested to see what cultural practices or cultural advocacy being done for Indigenous people.
Awesome. Thank you. One more person. And yeah.
Probably more out of just curiosity.
Yeah.
Cultural competency, your statement. I'm running into I have a friend who's working they have a reservation as well as in my career. I it was also who's had the rules. Whenever they're usually just around reservations that really under the Indian Health Services to get a care for them.
Yeah.
And but like that they needed it, and so we go on tonight and about
Well, thanks for sharing a little bit more about where we come from.
So
where we're coming from.
I thought it'd be helpful to bring a map and to show you. So we are from like very North Dakota. Our house is actually 3 miles from the Canadian border, so right in the center of the state. And like Danny said, we don't live on the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa reservation, but we live right on the border. So kind of everything around us is reservation. And as you might be thinking, there's a lot of snow. And you're right, there is a lot of snow. This is our 3rd winter that we've been up there, and I feel like every year we get a little bit better at kind of surviving the winters. We showed this picture 2 years ago. Actually, our girls are much bigger, but we just like love it because it is kind of like sometimes like, wow, that's a lot of snow. But other times, like Greta over there, like we have found ways to kind of enjoy the snow and embrace the no such thing as bad weather. So where we live obviously is very rural. There's actually like a new, I don't know if it's new, but it's new to me term called frontier. And some of like, because the population is so rural, it doesn't even meet the qualification to be a rural, and it's called frontier. So that's kind of where we are. And then I practice as a primary care PA in a clinic. It's actually a Catholic clinic that is right on the border. So I don't work for the Indian Health Service, but work for a different clinic. And if any of you guys are Cahaba people or from Cahaba, I work with a man named Mark Gingrich. Actually, 2 years ago when we were here, after our talk, somebody came up to me and was like, hey, this doctor is coming up to work in that area. And they shared his name. I was like, he's actually coming to work at the clinic I'm at. And so it was just like this little picture of, or just like one of the things that God has just answered so many prayers of like, we had been praying for community because we were feeling so isolated. And then God brought up this family from Cahaba, believing family to our community. And it's just been like a huge blessing to work with them. And then we meet with them on a regular basis for Bible study.
And my role in the community is I recently finished my doctorate in math. Woohoo! Math, yeah. So I've been at a medical conference. So I got hired by, I worked at the tribal college. So if you're not familiar with tribal colleges, they're kind of like historical black colleges and universities, but pretty much mostly on reservations. And so I worked at Turtle Mountain College, and my role, I got hired. Well, before I did into that, it's really what brought us to this specific community. The Lord opened that door, opened that opportunity to work at the tribal college. And we're really thankful for that. So my role is I started a new bachelor's program in math education. So folks from the community can get their high school math teaching license and then continue to be math educators, high school math teachers in the community. And then and then a big part of the program is kind of like an Indigenous math focus or perspective. And so I wasn't planning on this, but now it's here. It's a fully online program. So if you know anyone, is interested in, wants to be a high school math teacher with kind of Indigenous math throughout that program, let me know, because I'm always recruiting. That was not in my notes, but it just popped in my mind anyway. So I really love working at the tribal college, Turtle Mountain College. It's a great place, and how the Lord kind of brought us to this specific community. 2 years ago, we gave a similar talk about kind of Indigenous health and us just moving up to Turtle Mountain. So Turtle Mountain, one of the things that they're proud of is being kind of at the center of Turtle Island. And so there's a lot of pride in their community. I think most communities have that. A friend just asked us before this talk, is like, well, what's happened in the last 2 years? Like, are you just kind of giving the same talk? And I was sheepish for a second, but we had a few mentors. Actually, one of them was Pastor James Brooks at Lawndale. And one of the things that he told us was about just relationship. And that really impacted me in my walk with the Lord and our family, but even in our community and our neighborhood. And I feel like there's not this huge change that you could say, this is what happened in the last 2 years, but there have been more relationships, stronger relationships with my coworkers and our neighbors and in the community. Another one, kind of our mentor type people, he is a mentor. His name is Bobby Dre-Eagle, and he just encouraged us that, like, if you've been in the community for 5 years, you're new. Like, you're still new to the community. And they're like, are you going to stay? And so I'm one of the things that kind of reflecting on like what's happened in the last 2 years is going to say we've, Lord willing, think we've kind of found a more sustainable life, that like we do think we could be here for the long term, even though it's only been a couple of years at this point. I think the other thing that we've kind of started to doing, and you're going to get to see more of that, is just learning from native believers. That's been a huge thing that has started and hopefully will continue to be more and more part of our life. And with that, we are not like an experts on Indigenous health. Like, that is not our role at all. We're learning, and hopefully we'll continue to be in that spot. And anything, especially I want to say anything about Turtle Mountain, we are outsiders to the Turtle Mountain community, and they have been very generous to us, welcoming us in the last handful of years. And we're very thankful for that. And officially, I also say like no disclosures.
So our objectives, we actually wanted to take a bit of time to introduce to you something called the First Nations version, which is an Indigenous translation of the New Testament. And we're going to get to dive into that in a little bit. Then, of course, we're wanting to continue that conversation about Indigenous health within the CCHF community, connect those of us who are working amongst Indigenous people as well as those who are interested. And then we're going to briefly discuss a few healthcare considerations as well.
So with the introduction, there's 2 books that I brought 10 of. So 10 of you need to take these home. The first one was called When the Great Spirit Walked Among Us. It's by Terry Wildman. He's a Ojibwe and some Cree. It's the 4 Gospels kind of put into one story, but with kind of like the verbiage of storytelling, let's say native storytelling. And that went really well, that he was encouraged, and he got kind of a broader group of native folks. And then they did a First Nations translation of the New Testament. And so that's, when you got your handout, you'll see kind of a bunch of those. So on the top, I'm going to ask someone to stand up and loudly, clearly read just that dedication right on top. Anyone willing to stand up and loudly? Perfect. Thank you.
This translation of the Good Story is dedicated to the Indigenous people island, North America, the tribal nations that call this land home. The First Nations versions will raise healing for those who have suffered under the dominance of colonial governments, who have, with the help of the churches and missionary organizations, often took our lands to our languages, our cultures, and even our children. As our tribal nations work hard to reclaim what has been stolen, it is our hope that the colonial language that was forced upon us can now serve our people in a good way by presenting the Creator sets us free, Jesus, in a more culturally relevant context.
Awesome. Can I have someone else stand up and read the for the church sentence? Anyone else? Awesome.
For the church, the FNV is for all the churches and is especially for those involved in contextual ministry with nature.
Awesome. So, in the continued spirit of participation and community, I just want to ask what stands out. What stands out to you? There's no wrong answer. What stands out to you? And we'll have a few people go for it. Yeah.
Got to visit breakout section talking about it just sharing like spiritual characteristics with nations and seeing that it's perfect emotion, and it just feeling this for me. I just never thought of spirit like Christianity as something that could be awful. because in like reading this, like in their eyes, that like everything that was stolen from them was under that guise. And to just come at somebody with years of sheep and this and that as well, made you really, really hurtful.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Could people hear her?
Could people
Maybe
hear
when-
that?
when-
It is tough.
Yeah.
But I will, if it's okay, if I'll try to reiterate being reminded of the context that Christianity isn't necessarily a positive word, but actually hundreds of years of oppression through Christianity. And so just humming with like the 4 points of the gospel or something is going to likely it could be hurtful and kind of, and we'll talk more about that. Other people, what kind of stands out in these first two? Oh yeah. Yeah. In English, by the way, is the foreign language on the land, just to like make that extra clear. The Bible's written in English, not Ojibwe or Navajo or whatever other language. And there are translations in certain indigenous languages, but not all of them. This Bible is written in English. And that reframing of, we'll talk about boarding schools in particular for a little bit, but English and the Bible were used in a very hurtful way. And so the hope of this version is
Like
to
how
turn
big
from
the
that.
gospel is that like that can be brought. Yeah, that there can be hope.
I thought a couple other hands, yeah.
I was gonna say that just reading over this, it said out to me using free or subsidiary as kind of the representation of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The meaning of names and place names or just names in general, that Jesus in English doesn't have a ton of like meaning, whereas like one of our daughter's middle names is Joy. And like, like, okay, that's her name, Joy. But you also know it means like, hey, she's Joy. Like there's something there. And similarly, Jesus is Yahweh sets free, or like Yahweh is the savior from Yeshua and Joshua. And you can go into that kind of history there. So not reframing in a bad way, but like this is actually the meaning of the name. Absolutely. One more? Well, actually, okay.
Actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was a missionary kid, so here missions actually. I mean, the denomination I belonged to was a Christian Missionary Alliance. So I mean, I come a long way since then, but it was really offensive to me to hear missions talk about this way. My first week in high school ideas, advanced, like
Yeah.
So, and then when I think about, I lived in West Africa, so when I think about colonial, I think about the French.
Yeah.
Whoever.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Okay, so we are gonna dive into a couple different passages and wanted to read them from this version to talk through a little bit. So the first one, the First Nation version, is just actually right now the New Testament. This, of course, comes from Isaiah, but it's in the beginning of when the Great Spirit walked among us. So can I have another volunteer stand up and read this Isaiah passage?
Come, let us sit down in the council house together, then face to face you may hear what my heart is saying. Your bad hearts and broken ways have stained your spiritual garments, a stain so deep they could not wash them clean. But this is what I will do for you. I will take your blood-red garments and wash them until they are as white as snow. I will wash away the deepest stain until you are as clean and white as the tip of a eagle's wings.
Thanks. So would anyone want to share? Does anything stand out to you in this passage? And it can take a little while to sink in, especially if you're not used to reading or hearing it in this version. For me, I think one of the things is your bad hearts and broken ways. I think it's just like the verbiage of that, or just like the visual picture of that, is just really helpful. Of like, yeah, like that is sin, like our bad hearts and broken ways. And then I think the other part of just like a tip of eagle's wings, like for many people, we don't know like the wing of the eagle, like the whiteness of that, but like how culturally relevant that is. Jesus making us white. Thinking the NIV, it's like white as wool. Also, wool, like for culturally, like, or for most of us, we don't really know like what is, I guess, a white sheep, but it's not like that cultural context. Any other thoughts that stand out in this passage?
Council house. I'm not sure I know exactly what that is, but I think it's a representation of like the church place, or a place of worship, a place of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I just again add the from the Great Spirit to the tribes of wrestles with Creator. What does Israel, the story and the place name of Israel is wrestles with Creator. And just every time you see Israel being reminded, oh, that's wrestles with Creator. So from Gift of Creator tells the good story. Could anyone read? This is on the backside. If you hadn't flipped it over yet, flip it over. Didn't know there's a whole nother side. Would anyone be willing to stand? And again, after that, I'll kind of ask what stands out to you.
Asking the wrong question, Creator sets free. Jesus answered them. You do not understand the sacred teachings or the power of the Great Spirit. That's a dirty wisdom keeper, he asks. Which instructions in our tribal laws tonight first? Creator sets free, Jesus answered him. You must love the Great Spirit from deep within, with the strength of your arms and the thoughts of your mind, and the courage of your heart. This is the first and greatest is yours. The second is like the first commandment. You must follow your fellow human beings in the same way you love yourself. The law and the words of the prophets all find their full meaning.
Amen. So yeah, what stands out to us or to you about this section? Yeah.
I think for me, I'm gonna use the word Great Spirit, referring to God.
Yeah.
That's really interesting to me because I feel like in our culture, the connotation I have with Great Spirit and Native Americans is just like a spiritual realm that's not associated to Christianity at all. So I think it's interesting to disassociate that term from just the spiritual realm, but it is the same context of the God that I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many, the name for God, right? It's like a really big topic. And then many of the creation stories will Great Spirit, Great Myth, translated into English. So like they're different in Ojibwe. Yeah, it could say like Gitchi Manitou, which again is Great Spirit, or Gege Manitou would be like the Great Kind Spirit, and that character of who God is, right? Like, and to be wrapped up in those names. And then God is a German, like just like Easter has like this like random German history that isn't from the Bible per se. The word Easter or the word God, that's a translation, and it's not that those words are wrong. I don't know if I don't. Can still use the word God, but it has a German history, not a Hebrew history. That's also, sorry, this got me excited about that one, but I love that the Bible has Hebrew and Greek because there's such a profound difference in those languages of the kind of culture worldview behind those languages. And that's something I was just going to throw in. It was just a good time for it. When I like listen to some of like the elders in our community or like traditional knowledge keepers, whatever you may call them, and they're telling me something about like a relational worldview or being a humbly part of creation and not above creation. And then I read something, or I like listening to the Bible Project if you ever do that, and they're talking about Hebrew culture, and I'm like, on Bible Project, they're talking about the Hebrews, and that's just what this Ojibwe elder just told me like a week ago. And how often, like again and again, as I'm trying to learn, be a part of that community effort for language revitalization, that the Hebrew tribal history has a lot of connection, and even in the language itself. Other comments or thoughts from this particular passage? Yeah.
I think one of the things that really struck me is a lot of times when I'm reading scripture and I can remember a word or a phrase, like I counted that from for it. This translation, this maybe a good job of like writing it out, or like painting a picture of the same thought.
Yeah. Even just the word like sin or like, well, we gotta get like an explanation for that to understand like bad hearts and broken ways. It kind of like brings it. Absolutely. Absolutely. To that point, I've been reading through this through like as much like regular devotion, and it's been so helpful to just like explain things and hear things in a perspective that I hadn't before. Any
thoughts?
All
right, we have one last passage that we're going to do. So this is from Philippians 2, 1-5. So small man, Paul, to the sacred family in village of horses. Can anyone stand up and read this one for us?
As he walked the road with the chosen one, have you gained from his courage from journeying? Having found comfort in his love, do you share together in his spirit? Has this tenderness and mercy captured your heart? If so, then have the same kind of thoughts. Love with one heart, join together in one spirit, and walk side by side on one path. This will make my heart leap for joy. But when you do these things, make sure you do them for the right reasons. You don't let selfish ways take you down the path of bragging or trying to look better than others. Instead, let humility be your guide as you honor others above yourself. Each of you should look to the needs of others, not just to your own. Think about yourself in the same way Creator says Jesus, the chosen one, thought about himself.
Thanks. All right. How about any thoughts on this one? Anything that stands out? Yeah.
Loving the journey in language and paths and guides walking alongside.
Yeah, we actually just studied this passage a couple weeks ago in our Bible study, and that was, I think, something we kept talking about, of that part where it says, like, as you walk this road with the chosen one, of just like the fact of this journey we have, right, with Jesus, like that it's not just a one moment, but it's a walk the road. And then when it goes farther down and it says, like, walking with each other, and just like as you're walking with each other, well, then you're going to learn from each other, right? And you not walking one ahead of the other, but side by side, and how that can also just open up. Then we're aware of the needs of others and things like that. Yeah.
And I would add, I think that really comes from those like almost worldview differences that come from language. Like English is a much more noun focused language, whereas most indigenous languages are much more verb focused. So there's just a differing perspective in the language, or like you're in action, like you're always in movement. And so that's right. You can tell that that's specifically like emphasized throughout, but because it just comes from that perspective or that kind of worldview.
Yeah.
I just think as I'm like reading over this, and I think as we're like looking at these, it's easy to think through like what the very cultural context of it is, or like to see these things of like the journey in the language, or kind of the names for Jesus or for other people, and like recognize what sorts of things really have to do with the culture. But I'm kind of like looking at the ESV, or like looking at my translation and my Bible as we're reading through this, and thinking about how like our translation is also a cultural translation that we apply to our own context. And in some ways, like this kind of changes how you would interpret the verse. And like obviously the Hebrew and the Greek would like that as the original translation or the original written form. And so I think it's making me think more about, oh, like my translation is actually what I think of as the Bible of God is also like translated to my own culture. It has kind of a different relevance or meaning. Like I interpret it in a certain way because of that, and so I think it's making me think a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
Sure.
Do you know how like they would have felt this? Like, did they go from one the Hebrew Greek and then write this, or did they go from like a different translation to this?
That is a great question. I don't know the exact process. I do know. Let's see if it's in here.
It might be in the front.
In the front, it has the list of like people who were part of like the translation team.
And I know that in the front, it talks a little bit about how they did it and like working with multiple different churches. And then they would like send the manuscript and go through it. So, but I don't know. That's a good question. Whether it was like, how, yeah. How many? Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah. So there was like 10 or 11 folks from First Nations, Canada, U.S., Mexico. Yep. Mexico.
Yeah. So I can.
But yeah, I don't know like exactly how they went through it. I am curious now too.
Yeah. Sure.
These people, do you find yourself talking about Jesus as the greatest and free? Like, have you adopted some of this bromance as your people?
That is a great question. I would say I have been pondering and thinking about it. How much have I actually done it? Not ever in like, well, yeah, there's a whole like, yeah, that'll be I'm thinking about how to do that. Just even in our prayers at home, like with our girls, would I also use Creator Sets Free as a name for Jesus? That one I feel more confident in because they're my kids and I get to share with them what I believe. But when I think about coworkers and neighbors.
Yeah. We I wouldn't say I have yet. We actually just put these in our exam rooms not that long ago. It kind of was like, why didn't we think of that sooner? But that's a great question. Any other thoughts to stand out to you on this?
So I think one reason we wanted to print these off is because it takes a little time. Like you're like the first time you read, they're like, whoa, that's kind of not. And to your point, like, oh, the way I've been reading English has this entire cultural context that feels normal to me. And like, oh, okay, so it takes. So that's why we wanted to print it out so you can have it. But 10 people can walk. Please take one of these 10 people. You're like, maybe I'll be one of those 10. So it takes time, but into that kind of a discussion on context, not just this Bible, we wanted to give a very brief history, kind of back in the dedication, right? It talked about some of the violence in the name of Christianity. So before colonization, there was over 500 nations on this continent. Right around Columbus time, the 15th century, the doctrine of discovery, official church leaders, the Pope, gave Christian explorers the right to claim land as discovered. This idea that it was empty, no like real humans lived there, and it could be claimed for Christian nations. So the doctrine of discovery, how I maybe just explained it to you there, is like, are you like, really? So the Supreme Court in 2005 just again referenced the doctrine of discovery for United States land base. I don't know anything about the Canadian Supreme Court necessarily, but at least in the United States, this kind of view that the land was empty and it can be discovered by Christian explorers. That has specifically kind of carried over into the United States with the term with manifest destiny. This idea from sea to shining sea is divinely given by God to American white settlers. And so that, again, kind of continues the aura of both the U.S. history, but like church history, like America being this Christian nation perspective from the First Nations. Again, continuing with boarding schools. So boarding schools were government funded with the kind of the goal to erase Native people would probably be the best way. Half of them are run by the military, half of them are run by missionaries. And so that history is in our spiritual ancestry. We're a part of that, which is like something that you get to lament about and learn that like hard reality of our spiritual history. And then
too, like kind of like to Lisa's point of the fact that part of the history of the boarding schools was to take away the language and to speak English. And so, like the fact that this version uses English to bring hope is just, again, one of those really incredible things of the gospel.
Yeah, and this just popped in my mind and I just feel like I want to share it. And if you have like the cowboy and Indian like trope, rarely were cowboys and Indians fighting. So just like get that out there. It was the U.S. military fighting the military or like the native nations warriors, army, or whatever you want to call it. And so just like, and boarding schools up until the 50s, and we'll get to the medical stuff, don't worry, was under the War Department or Department of Defense. It wasn't, well, I'll get to that in a second. But it's U.S. military and government with the support of Christian principles, I would call evil, in the doctrine of discovery and manifest destiny, that perpetuated and arguably continues to perpetuate lots of evil and hurt. So in response to this, some of my responses to this, I recently wish I had a picture of it or something. I should have put a picture on the slide. But there's a new Bible commentary called The New Testament in Color, a multi-ethnic Bible commentary. I've really been enjoying it. It's by Esau McCulley, who's a black pastor and theologian. And right in the beginning, he put this: too often sanctification has been confused with westernization. Like, hopefully you see how, even though he's seeing that from his like black history, his personal perspective, the same for sure with boarding schools and the entire assimilation and genocide efforts. The second way that I feel like partly I'm responding to this is just like how we're trying to live out our daily lives. And he has this kind of long quote, but I am going to read it. He calls it this dual apologetic. He says, early black Bible readers had to counter lies coming from white Christians. and in his case, such as the Ham myth that doomed African peoples to slavery. But they also had to argue for the relevancy of Christianity to the concerns of African peoples. And so this required them to walk the fine line between criticizing white Christian churches and leaving space for Christianity itself. Christianity had to be a source of resistance. And so I feel like this, when I read that, I was like, this is often how I feel working at a tribal college or with my neighbors, this kind of double-edged sword, or like kind of double, he calls it dual apologetic. Maybe that's the word I should use. So,
yeah. And for me, as I kind of been trying to process through the history to like what that looks like, there verse in Isaiah has just brought me like so much comfort. I remember like one day I was laying on the floor in the living room and just like listening to Isaiah, and this passage came. We got to this passage and it said, "They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They'll renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations." And just like, again, that story of hope, right? Like that hope that we have in Jesus, that he can rebuild those ancient ruins, like generations, like we see just the trauma and the devastation from generation to generation. But yet we know that like can redeem that. And so just have found such comfort in that. And so because this is a CME talk, we promise we are getting to a little bit of medical stuff. And so a little bit of cultural medical considerations. We just wanted to give a little terminology, because I think sometimes there's a lot of different words and it's hard to kind of know what word means what. And so Dave's going to give a little.
These are some of the terms you might have heard or seen. First Nations, Métis, and Inuit are all specifically connected to the Canadian government. So this like imaginary line between US and Canada, right? Like that wasn't there. But Canada uses those terms specifically in the census and medical, any like research studies, anything like that, anything with demographics. Because their treaties, the Canadian government treaties with First Nations and Inuit people, that's the verbiage that was in the treaties. In the United States, American Indian, Alaskan Native is the term that you're going to see because that is the terms that come from the treaties. So treaties, again, two governments, two nations had a war of have some agreement that they've come to. It's complicated. And because there's 500 nations, right, it's not just like one treaty with the indigenous people. All the different nations have different treaties with the U.S. government, depending on where they were, all sorts of things. Indigenous is kind of more of a up-and-coming. It's maybe used more recently. Last week, I heard another person from my community say, I don't like that word, indigenous. Like their preference, and I think most often is the nation name. So like Ojibwa, Chippewa. Again, those two. Ojibwe is the French version. Chippewa is the English version, right? There's French colonization, English colonization, two Christian nations fighting against each other. Anyway. But then like Anishinaabe might be the term that you might hear, but that's a broad term. Ocheti Shakoi would be like the Dakota Lakota. So we live in North Dakota. It says the Dakota people lived more on the eastern side and the Lakota live more on like the western side. But so there's so many names, right, that have been kind of Englishized. But these are just some of the names and have all sorts of different connotations to them. But the nation name, like usually when I'm trying to talk to someone, and to kind of avoid this, like what's sometimes called pan-Indian, which is like all Indians are the same, like to avoid that, having the nation name is usually preferred. Oh yeah. And so I have mentioned treaties a few times. So it really starts with the Constitution, or it doesn't really start with the Constitution. A place that this slide starts is with the Constitution, where there's Article 1, Section 8, and Article 6, Clause 2, specifically mentions Indian tribes. So again, Indian, so that's in the Constitution. So that is what kind of determines our some of our current language, legal language, like in court and such. I gotta go faster. Okay. And then in the 50s, they said, okay, yeah, we'll move the Bureau of Indian Affairs out of the Department of Defense or the War Department and move it into Human and Health Services, which was generally a good thing. But again, like many years after, they said if there was a treaty, it was broken. So there's like some attempts to like say, okay, we'll follow a little bit of the treaties that we made, which is why IHS exists. So the first IHS building was built in the 50s, but many of them didn't. The one in our community wasn't until the 70s. And so that's a little very brief history.
So again, neither of us work for the Indian Health Service. And so, we can't speak specifically to that, but we thought it'd be helpful just to bring up a few misconceptions. So the first misconception is since IHS provides services without cost to enrolled tribal members, most American Indian, Alaska Native people, have access to affordable health care. And no, that's actually that's not true. There's about 2.5 million that do get their health care out of the whole total 5.2 million of American Indian, Alaska, of Native people. Second misconception, American Indian, Alaska Natives only seek care at IHS or tribal services. Again, not true. And this is important because likely, even though you don't maybe think you serve a Native population, especially if you live in an urban area, it's a good chance that you do have patients that are Native. Since healthcare and prescriptions are provided, usually the general perception is a positive one. Again, not true. We kind of touched on it. There's been a lot of challenges with the just lack of medical or lack of resources that overall not necessarily been a positive experience.
This is a map of where the current IHS facilities are. Not surprisingly, they're not due to genocide and removal. They're not as much on the eastern side of the United States. And we'll just keep going.
Yeah. So health disparities, as you can imagine, right? We're all here at the conference. We know trauma affects health. And so just the reality of the trauma, the ACE is the adverse childhood events, life expectancy is definitely decreased. Higher rates in all of the chronic diseases, right? Chronic liver disease, cirrhosis, type 2 diabetes, mental health, and then barriers. Most of the time, especially like where we live, it is rural or frontier, right? And so there is multiple, like just different barriers of being remote. And so we live 2 hours away is like the next closest kind of bigger town that has more medical care. 2 to 4 hours is where we're usually sending any patients for special care. So we try to do as much as we can in-house, right? And we have winter for a long period of time. And so winter roads and just the lack of transportation, lack of resources make it really difficult for people to access care. And then again, right, poverty, food insecurities are very common. So I just wanted to share a few kind of elements of my practice, I guess. So again, like I said, we're kind of in the rural kind of community health center, which has just been really fun. We have a small ER, we have a pretty actually busy ER, but a small inpatient service as well as our clinic, all housed under one roof. And in our community, like you get to care for like the whole community and the whole family, right? Like I'm always making connections of like, oh, this person's related to this person. And one of the things that I found is super helpful is that we get the weekly paper. And I always go through the weekly paper for a couple reasons. One, I usually look at the obituaries and see if any of my patients have died. And then I've like tried to start reading through family members, and it just has allowed me to kind of make more of those connections. And then I always go through the sports page and see if any of my teenagers are, what they're doing sports wise. And I found like, you can like see the patient. You're like, wow, I saw you had a really good game, or, oh, you got this honor. Like, it has really helped kind of open up doors of like, yeah, we really care about the community and we're connected. So that was just like one of those small little things that we've done. Go ahead. Yeah. And then, like I mentioned, this version we have just found so helpful, the First Nations version. And so trying to introduce that into some of our exam rooms and figuring out how to continue to build relationships, or in practice, right? Someone used the term like faith flags, right? When there's when someone brings up something spiritual, I feel like opening up those doors to like ask to pray with patients or to just talk a little bit more about different things of faith. And that's slow. Like it's not like that happens on a regular basis, but just again, as we stay in the community and want to just be invested in the community, I feel like that shows a lot. Like I often have patients that are like, okay, well, you can be my doctor, but are you planning to stay? Like, because if you're just leaving in a year, like people are just so used to having gone through so many providers, or every year, they have to see somebody different. And so that idea of like, okay, we want to move into the community and we want to be there and be present. Again, trusting God with wherever he leads us, but with that intention of like, we want to be there long term. a few things. We would love to be able to, if people want to join for dinner afterwards, we'd love to just chat more. We're always wanting to, again, continue that conversation. And 2 years ago when we were here, we said, you know what, let's do a quarterly prayer meeting. Like, that would be amazing. And that didn't happen. We had another kid, I guess, and we never got that going. And so we're like, let's retry this again this year, and maybe we can kind of get that off the ground. Again, if you're interested in any of these things, let us know. Our email is on those sheets too. So with that, we have a couple minutes. Questions, comments. We would love to hear you guys' thoughts. And yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any additional details on how the Supreme Court used the doctrine of discovery?
Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't say it was using the doctrine of discovery to justify the United States having the land. So I would, positive or negative is perspective, but I wouldn't say that's a great thing. What's even makes it worse is the Christian backing of it. To my perspective, is the Christian backing of Christ, God said white settlers should have this land. I think that's some of the most heinous part of it. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? I add, please, we need 10 people.
We don't want
to take. Again, this one is the 4 Gospels kind of wrapped up into one story. And you can buy these on Amazon too, but you might as well take them home. And then this one is the whole New Testament. And they're working on Psalms and Proverbs right now, this kind of translation team, which I look forward to meeting someone. I've been at a distance, but not
we would love to meet this
any of the
Terry Wildman. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all very much.